The deafening roar of machinery jolted me from my morning routine. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor as I rushed to the window. Through the early morning mist, I watched in disbelief as a massive yellow bulldozer's blade dug into the edge of my driveway, tearing up gravel and soil that had been undisturbed for decades. Two more machines flanked it, their engines rumbling like hungry beasts. Between them stood a woman in an immaculate suit, clipboard in hand, directing the operation with cold efficiency. My peaceful retirement at my grandfather's farm had just been violently interrupted, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I threw open the door and raced down my porch steps. "Stop! What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice nearly drowned out by the machinery. The woman turned, and instead of embarrassment or apology, her face showed something far worse: satisfaction. She held up her hand, and the bulldozers fell silent. "Mr. Renner," she called out, her voice crisp with artificial politeness, "I'm Elaine Prescott, president of the Oakshire Estates Homeowners Association. This illegal access point is being permanently closed today." She waved some official-looking papers with the smug confidence of someone who believed they held all the power. "You've ignored our notices long enough." Little did she know, I've spent 30 years as the county surveyor before retiring to this farm. And here's the kicker: I literally own the records to every property line in this entire county. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. You're about to witness the most satisfying takedown of HOA tyranny in history, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for when Elaine realizes exactly who she picked a fight with. 6 months ago, I'd left behind 3 decades of service as the county surveyor to retire to my grandfather's farm. After losing my wife Claire 3 years earlier to cancer, I needed a fresh start, somewhere peaceful where I could heal and rebuild. This 100-acre property had been in my family for generations, and when my grandfather passed, leaving it to me, it felt like fate. The old farmhouse needed work, but that was exactly what I wanted: a project to pour my heart into. The first few months were exactly what I needed. I'd wake up with the sunrise, spend my mornings renovating the kitchen or fixing the porch railings, and my afternoons planning out my workshop. There's something deeply therapeutic about physical labor when you're trying to put yourself back together. By early spring, I had the house looking almost respectable and had started clearing land for a vegetable garden. My closest neighbor, Lucy Powell, a retired freelance journalist with a keen eye for injustice, would occasionally bring over homemade pies and share stories about the area's history. It was simple, quiet, and exactly what I needed. That peace lasted until Oakshire Estates, the luxury housing development that had sprung up about a quarter-mile down the road, decided my property was somehow under their jurisdiction. The development was new, maybe 15 years old, while my family's farm had been there since the 1960s. The first sign of trouble was a letter taped to my mailbox about unapproved landscaping modifications. I laughed it off, figuring someone had made a clerical error. Then came notices about my supposedly non-compliant fence line and mailbox. Each one I tossed in a file folder labeled "Crazy Neighbors," not giving them much thought. These HOA types get a little power and suddenly think they own the world, my friend Bruce Fletcher told me over the phone. Bruce and I had been friends since college, and now he served as the deputy county clerk, still working at the same county offices where I'd spent my career. "Just ignore them, Jeremy. Your property predates their development by decades. They don't have any authority over you." I should have taken the situation more seriously when I received a certified letter from Elaine Prescott, the Oakshire Estates HOA president. The letter claimed my driveway encroached on HOA land and demanded $15,000 for retroactive road usage fees or face immediate access restriction. The letterhead was embossed, the language formal and threatening, but the claims were so absurd I couldn't help but laugh. My driveway had been there for over 60 years, long before Oakshire Estates was even conceived. "This has to be some kind of scam," I told Lucy when she stopped by that afternoon. "They can't possibly think my farm is part of their HOA." Lucy's expression turned serious as she examined the letter. "I wouldn't underestimate Elaine Prescott," she warned. "Before I retired, I was researching a story about aggressive HOAs in the region. Her name came up multiple times. She's a former real estate developer who went bankrupt about 7 years ago after a major project collapsed. She lost everything: her company, her reputation, millions of dollars. Now she runs that HOA like her personal kingdom. She's been known to force elderly homeowners to sell by burying them in violation fees. I should have listened more carefully to Lucy's warning. I should have made some calls, prepared a response. Instead, I tossed the letter into my crazy neighbor's file and forgot about it. I didn't know that while I was dismissing her threats as ridiculous, Elaine was on the phone with contractors who owed her favors. How was I supposed to know she'd go nuclear over a driveway that had been there since the 1960s? By the time I realized just how serious she was, 3 bulldozers were already parked across my only access road, and the real battle was about to begin. The next morning started like any other. I brewed my coffee, toasted some bread, and was planning my day's work when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. Curious, I stepped onto my porch and nearly dropped my mug. 3 massive yellow bulldozers were lined up across my driveway entrance, effectively sealing off the only access point to my property. Standing in front of them, clipboard in hand and wearing a power suit despite the early hour, was a woman I immediately recognized from Lucy's description, Elaine Prescott. The scene before me was surreal, like something out of a bad movie about suburban warfare. One bulldozer was positioned directly at the mouth of my driveway, its massive blade lowered to the ground like a metallic castle gate. The other 2 were angled on either side, creating an impenetrable barrier. Behind them stood a black SUV with tinted windows and 2 men in security uniforms leaning against it, arms crossed. This wasn't just an impromptu visit. This was a calculated operation that had been planned with military precision. She was talking to a burly man in a hard hat, presumably the operator of one of the machines, when she spotted me walking toward them. Rather than looking embarrassed or apologetic about blocking someone's property, she actually smiled, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Mr. Renner," she called out, voice crisp with artificial politeness. "I'm Elaine Prescott, president of the Oakshire Estates Homeowners Association. I believe you received our notices regarding your non-compliant access road." I struggled to maintain my composure as I approached. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The dew was still fresh on the grass, the morning sun barely clearing the trees, and here was this woman with heavy machinery blockading my home as casually as if she were delivering a fruit basket. "Miss Prescott, what exactly do you think you're doing on my property? This driveway has been here for over 60 years. My family has owned this land since before your development even existed." Elaine's smile didn't waver. "That's a common misconception. According to our records and plat maps, your access road crosses Oakshire Estates common property for approximately 27 feet. We've tolerated this encroachment out of goodwill, but after your repeated refusal to comply with association regulations, the board has voted to enforce our property rights." She handed me a folder containing what appeared to be property maps and legal documents. Even from a glance, I could tell they were either fabricated or severely misinterpreted, but they looked official enough to convince the contractors. I flipped through the documents, noting the official-looking stamps and signatures. They appeared legitimate to the untrained eye, but having spent 3 decades examining property documents, I spotted several inconsistencies immediately. The timestamps didn't align with county filing procedures. Some of the reference numbers followed a format that hadn't been used in years. Most tellingly, there was a surveyor's certification bearing what was supposed to be my signature, but the flourish on the Y was all wrong. I'd never signed my name that way in 30 years of professional work. The man in the hard hat, Arnold Davenport, according to his name patch, shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm just doing what I was hired for," he said quietly. "Ms. Prescott says this is HOA property and you're trespassing. We're here to install a permanent barrier." I studied Arnold more carefully. His weathered face showed the lines of someone who'd worked outdoors for decades, but there was a weariness in his eyes that went beyond physical exhaustion. "You don't seem entirely comfortable with this situation, Mr. Davenport," I observed. Arnold glanced nervously at Elaine before responding. "I've got a crew to pay and bills due. Miss Prescott helped me keep my business afloat during the recession when no one else would extend credit. I owe her." The subtext was clear. He was repaying a debt, not necessarily acting out of conviction. While they were talking, I noticed Lucy Powell had appeared from her adjacent property. She was discreetly recording the confrontation on her phone, giving me a subtle nod when our eyes met. At least I'd have documentation of this insanity. Lucy had positioned herself strategically, close enough to capture everything, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. Her decades of journalistic experience were evident in her calm, methodical approach to documenting the scene. Elaine saw my attention shift and turned to see Lucy. Her expression hardened momentarily before she composed herself. A flash of genuine anger crossed her face before she recalibrated her approach. Now, Mr. Renner, we're willing to be reasonable. If you agree to sign our compliance agreement and pay the $25,000 in accumulated fees and penalties, we can resolve this amicably. The amount had somehow increased by $10,000 from the letter. $25,000, I repeated, making sure Lucy's recording caught the figure. Just last week it was $15,000 in your certified letter. What exactly happened in 7 days to increase the penalty by $10,000? Elaine's smile tightened. Additional administrative review costs and emergency enforcement measures. It's all itemized in the agreement. She produced a multi-page document with a signature line conspicuously highlighted in yellow. Sign now, and we can have these machines gone before lunch. Otherwise, she let the threat hang in the air, gesturing to the bulldozers. I took a deep breath, remembering my years of dealing with property disputes as county surveyor. Losing my temper wouldn't help. Ms. Prescott, I need time to review these documents and consult with my attorney. I request 24 hours before you take any irreversible actions. That's not how this works, she snapped, her pleasant facade cracking slightly. You've ignored multiple notices. Either sign now and pay, or we proceed with the barrier installation today. Your trespassing ends now. I noticed Arnold and the other workers exchanging uncomfortable glances. They clearly hadn't expected this level of confrontation. One of the younger operators whispered something to his colleague, who shook his head in response. Keeping my voice level, I addressed them directly. Gentlemen, I want you to know that I was the county surveyor for 30 years before retiring. I suspect there's been a serious misrepresentation of property lines here. If you proceed, you may be participating in property damage and trespassing, which could expose you to liability. Arnold's eyes widened at this revelation. County surveyor? For 30 years? He looked back at the property line marker Elaine had shown them earlier, doubt clearly growing in his mind. Elaine quickly interjected. They work for me, Mr. Renner, not you. Your intimidation tactics won't work. But I could see the seed of doubt I'd planted. You have until noon to make your decision, she added, checking her watch. After that, we make the barrier permanent. As I turned to leave, Arnold quietly asked, Mr. Renner, did you ever work on the original survey for this area? Back when it was all farmland? I did, I confirmed. I know every benchmark and monument in this county. Arnold nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression replacing his earlier discomfort. I could tell he was reassessing his position in this confrontation. I walked back to my house the long way, cutting across my east field since my driveway was blocked. Morning birds sang in stark contrast to the tension of the standoff. The irony wasn't lost on me. This beautiful property, which was supposed to be my peaceful retirement haven, had become a battleground overnight. As I reached my porch, I heard Elaine on her phone. He's being difficult. Initiate Plan B. Whatever that meant, it couldn't be good. As soon as I was inside, I called Bruce at the county office. Bruce, I need your help accessing some records. Urgently. The Oakshire Estates HOA has 3 bulldozers blocking my driveway, claiming it crosses their property. What? Bruce sounded genuinely shocked. That's ridiculous. Your farm predates that development by decades. I'm looking at the county plat map right now and your access road is completely within your property lines. What's going on? That's what I intend to find out, I replied grimly. And something tells me this goes deeper than a simple boundary dispute. Can you pull all the records related to the Oakshire Estates development approval? Original surveys, amendments, everything. I'm coming in. What Elaine didn't know was that I was already making calls of my own. Bruce was about to help me access records that would change everything, records that only someone with my background would know how to use. The real fight was just beginning, and she had no idea who she was up against. Getting to the county building was my first challenge, given that my driveway was blocked. Lucy offered to drive me through her adjoining property, using a seldom-used farm access road that connected to the main highway. As we bounced along in her old pickup truck, she filled me in on what she knew about Elaine Prescott. 7 years ago, she was riding high with her own development company, Prescott Ventures. She was working on a massive luxury complex called the Highlands, condos, shopping, and the works. She leveraged everything on it, including investments from some powerful people. Then the economy took a dive, construction costs skyrocketed, and the whole thing imploded spectacularly. She lost millions, some of it belonging to investors who weren't the forgiving type. From what I hear, she barely avoided criminal charges for some questionable financing practices. This explained the desperation behind Elaine's actions. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was someone trying to claw her way back from disgrace. So now she's using the HOA as her personal fiefdom, I asked. Lucy nodded grimly. It's her path to redemption. Oakshire Estates is prestigious enough to rebuild her reputation if she can show significant property value increases. There have been whispers about her targeting certain properties, finding ways to force sales or gain control of strategic parcels. I just never thought she'd be bold enough to go after your farm. When we arrived at the county building, Bruce was waiting with a cart full of document boxes and a worried expression. Jeremy, I've pulled everything we have on Oakshire Estates, plus the historical records for your property. But there's something strange going on. Some of the most recent survey amendments are inconsistent. We commandeered a conference room and began spreading documents across the table. As a surveyor, I knew exactly what to look for. The original development plans from 15 years ago showed a clear boundary between Oakshire Estates and my family's farm, with my driveway completely on my property. But a survey amendment, filed just 3 years ago, showed subtle changes to the boundary lines. Changes that, if legitimate, would indeed put about 20 feet of my driveway on HOA land. This is forgery, I muttered, comparing the documents side by side. Look at the authentication stamps. The newer document has surveyor's office approval, but I was the county surveyor 3 years ago and I never approved this change. Bruce examined the document closely. The signature, it looks like yours, but it's not, I stated flatly. Someone forged my signature on an official county document. The implications were staggering. Not just trespassing and harassment, but actual fraud involving county records. As we dug deeper, we discovered more irregularities. Meliora Lawson, a retired judge and former colleague, joined us after Bruce called her for legal advice. This goes beyond HOA overreach, she said gravely. This is criminal fraud. But why target your property specifically? There must be a reason Elaine is so determined to control your access road. The answer came when Bruce uncovered a file that had been misfiled, perhaps deliberately, in the wrong section of the archives. It contained preliminary development plans submitted just 6 months ago by Westridge Partners, a commercial development company. The plans showed a luxury condominium complex and retail center to be built on what was currently my farm. Westridge Partners, Meliora read from the document. Isn't that run by James Prescott? Bruce confirmed. Elaine's husband. The pieces were falling into place. Elaine wasn't just trying to assert HOA authority, she was laying groundwork for a major development project that would restore her reputation and finances. My farm was the centerpiece of the plan, but they needed my land, and they needed it cheap. But the biggest revelation came when we cross-referenced the original Oakshire Estate survey with the historical markers from my grandfather's property records. Due to a surveying error 15 years ago when Oakshire was first developed, their build had actually encroached on Renner Family Trust land. The calculations were clear. Approximately 15% of Oakshire Estates, including their clubhouse and Elaine's own house, was technically built on my family's land. My God, whispered Bruce. Do you realize what this means? Not only is your driveway completely on your property, but they've been building on your land for 15 years. I sat back, stunned by the magnitude of what we'd discovered. The records were crystal clear. Not only was my driveway completely legal, but Elaine's precious HOA clubhouse was sitting on land that technically belonged to me. But knowing the truth and proving it to bulldozer operators who were taking orders from a very convincing HOA president were two different challenges. I needed more than documents, I needed a plan with teeth. As we were preparing to leave, an elderly man noticed me from across the room. Jeremy Renner? Is that you? He approached slowly, leaning on a cane. I'm Mark Ruffalo. You probably don't remember me, but you helped me with a property line dispute about 8 years ago. The name clicked. Of course, Mr. Ruffalo. You had that beautiful garden property over on Willow Creek Road. His face darkened. Had is right. Lost it to that Oakshire Estates bunch. That woman Prescott claimed my garden encroached on HOA property. Started finding me thousands of dollars. On my fixed income, I couldn't fight it. Ended up selling for half what it was worth just to escape the harassment. She put up those fancy townhouses where my roses used to grow. Mark Ruffalo wasn't the only victim, we soon discovered. As word spread that I was in the building researching Oakshire Estates, several current and former county employees stopped by with stories. Elaine had been running similar schemes throughout the county, using falsified surveys and aggressive tactics to force vulnerable homeowners to sell. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. This was about justice for an entire community that had been bullied and defrauded by someone who thought she was untouchable. Armed with the truth and a growing sense of righteous anger, I gathered my evidence and prepared to fight back. Elaine Prescott had no idea what storm was about to hit her perfectly manicured neighborhood. With noon approaching rapidly, I needed to act quickly before Elaine made good on her threat to permanently destroy my driveway. Bruce helped me make copies of all the relevant documents, while I called Sheriff Daniel Jackson to request his presence at my property. The sheriff and I had worked together for years on various property disputes, and he had no love for overreaching HOAs after dealing with one in his own neighborhood. "Let me get this straight," Sheriff Jackson said over the phone. "This HOA president has bulldozers on your property based on fraudulent documents with your forged signature and plans to destroy your driveway? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Lucy had been busy rallying support in her own way. When she'd returned to the neighborhood, she'd started quietly talking to Oakshire Estates residents who had their own grievances with Elaine's leadership. By the time I returned to my farm with Bruce and our evidence, Lucy had assembled a small group of concerned citizens ready to witness whatever happened next. "Your property rights matter to all of us," Lucy explained as we regrouped on my porch. "If Elaine can do this to you, none of us are safe. Besides, a lot of these folks didn't know about the surveying error. They are horrified to learn their homes might be built on improperly acquired land." Caroline Bennett, the county attorney whom Bruce had called, arrived shortly after. "From what Bruce has shown me, we have enough evidence for emergency injunctive relief," she said. "I've already drafted the paperwork, but we should try to resolve this without court action first, if possible." My strategy was straightforward. Confront Elaine with the evidence of the fraudulent survey, reveal the truth about the original property lines, and demand an immediate removal of the bulldozers. If she refused, Sheriff Jackson would be there to enforce the law, and Caroline would file for emergency relief. But I suspected Elaine wouldn't back down easily. People like her rarely did. As we prepared our counteroffensive, Lucy pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know. I've been investigating Elaine since our conversation yesterday. Her latest scheme isn't just about your farm, it's about saving her reputation. The investor who lost millions in her failed Highlands project 7 years ago? He's the primary backer of Westridge Partners, her husband's company. This is her chance to make things right with him by delivering your land." This additional context made Elaine's desperate behavior make even more sense. She wasn't just after my land. She was trying to save herself from the consequences of her past failures. It was almost pitiful if she hadn't been willing to destroy others in the process. Our planning session was interrupted by the sound of machinery starting up. Looking out the window, I saw that one of the bulldozers had begun moving toward my driveway. "They're starting early," I said grimly. "Time's up." As we hurried toward the confrontation, I saw that Elaine had brought reinforcements. 2 security guards in uniforms with the Oakshire Estates logo. They stood flanking her like personal bodyguards as she directed the bulldozer operator to begin tearing up the first section of my driveway. "Stop that machine immediately!" I shouted as we approached. To my relief, Sheriff Jackson's patrol car pulled up at that exact moment, lights flashing. The bulldozer operator, seeing law enforcement arrive, immediately shut down his machine. Elaine looked like she'd seen a ghost. She clearly hadn't expected law enforcement to get involved. But the sheriff was just the opening act. As I stepped out from behind his car with my stack of documents, I couldn't help but smile. Behind me stood Bruce, Caroline, Lucy, and at least 20 residents of Oakshire Estates, all there to witness justice being served. "Elaine," I called out, "before you destroy any more of my property, there's something about this county and your own community that you really ought to know." The look on Elaine's face as she saw the crowd gathering behind me was priceless, a mixture of confusion, anger, and the first flickers of fear. She quickly tried to regain control of the situation, stepping forward with her clipboard held like a shield. "This is a private matter between the HOA and Mr. Renner," she announced loudly. "I must ask everyone else to disperse. These security personnel will escort you back to your homes if necessary." Sheriff Jackson stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Mr. Prescott, I'm Sheriff Daniel Jackson. I understand you've got heavy machinery blocking Mr. Renner's property access and have begun demolition without permits. I'm going to need to see any documentation authorizing this action." Elaine's confident smile returned as she handed over the same folder of documents she'd shown me earlier. "Everything is in order, Sheriff. Mr. Renner's driveway crosses HOA property, as these surveys clearly show. We've given him ample notice and opportunities to comply." I watched as Sheriff Jackson flipped through the documents, then looked up with a frown. "Ma'am, according to this, these surveys were approved by the county surveyor's office 3 years ago." He turned to me. Weren't you the county surveyor then, Jeremy? I was, I confirmed, stepping forward. And I never approved this survey amendment. That's not my signature. I handed the sheriff our own stack of documents. These are the original property records, showing that my driveway is entirely on my land. And there's more. According to the original property markers and surveys, approximately 15% of Oakshire Estates was actually built on land belonging to the Renner family trust due to a surveying error 15 years ago. A murmur ran through the crowd of residents. Elaine's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly. That's preposterous. These people are trying to confuse the issue with technical jargon. Our development was properly approved and built according to all county regulations. Then perhaps you can explain why we found these preliminary development plans submitted by Westridge Partners, your husband's company, showing plans to build luxury condos on Mr. Renner's farm once acquired? Caroline Bennett stepped forward, displaying the documents we'd found. Or why multiple county records related to Oakshire Estates contain what appear to be forged signatures. Elaine's composure was cracking. Those documents are confidential. Where did you get those? She realized her mistake immediately as gasps came from the crowd. She'd just confirmed the documents were genuine. One of the HOA board members, a woman named Barbara Winters, pushed through the crowd. You told us this was about covenant enforcement, Elaine. You said nothing about development plans or property acquisition. She turned to me. Mr. Renner, is it true that our homes might be built on your family's land? According to the original property markers and surveys, yes, I confirmed. But my issue isn't with individual homeowners. It's with the fraudulent manipulation of property records and the abuse of HOA authority to try to force me off my land. As I spoke, I noticed Lucy moving through the crowd, showing residents something on her phone. Videos and testimony she'd been collecting from other victims of Elaine's schemes. Mark Ruffalo had joined us as well, leaning on his cane as he told anyone who would listen about how he'd lost his beloved garden property to Elaine's machinations. The tide was turning rapidly against Elaine, who now looked cornered. In desperation, she played her final card. Sheriff, I want these people removed for trespassing on HOA property. This is nothing but a witch hunt based on outdated records. That's going to be difficult to enforce, Sheriff Jackson replied calmly, given that the property lines themselves are in dispute, and based on what I'm seeing here, there appears to be evidence of record tampering, which is a felony in this state. At that moment, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and a well-dressed man stepped out, looking annoyed. Elaine, what's going on? Why aren't the barriers installed yet? Westridge's investors are expecting an update this afternoon. He stopped short when he saw the crowd and the sheriff. James, Elaine hissed. Not now. But it was too late. James Prescott, Elaine's husband and president of Westridge Partners, had just confirmed their real plan in front of everyone. The collective anger from the Oakshire residents was palpable. They'd been used as pawns in the Prescott's scheme to rebuild their fortune and reputation. With her scheme rapidly unraveling before her eyes, Elaine made one last desperate play. This is all a simple misunderstanding, she said, her voice artificially calm. Tell you what, Renner, I'll have the bulldozers removed immediately and we can forget this whole thing happened. The crowd that had gathered went silent. Elaine looked around, realizing that not just me, but the entire community was now standing against her. Did she really think I'd just walk away after what she'd done? I looked at Sheriff Jackson, who gave me a subtle nod. It was time to play my final card. I don't think forgetting is an option anymore, Elaine, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Not when your actions have affected so many people. I turned to address the gathered crowd, feeling the weight of the moment. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting stark shadows across the faces of everyone present. Oakshire residents, county officials, and curious onlookers who had been drawn by the commotion. In that moment, I wasn't just defending my driveway. I was speaking for everyone who had ever felt powerless against arbitrary authority. The documents we've uncovered don't just prove my driveway is legitimate. They show that approximately 15% of Oakshire Estates properties, including the clubhouse and, ironically, Elaine's own home, are technically sitting on land that belongs to my family's trust due to a surveying error made 15 years ago. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Homeowners exchanged worried glances, some reaching for their phones, as if needing to document this revelation. One elderly woman near the front actually clutched her chest, the color draining from her face as she processed what this might mean for the home she'd lived in. I held up satellite imagery showing the original property markers alongside the current development. The images were striking, digitally enhanced aerial photos with original boundary markers highlighted in red, contrasted against the current property lines in blue. The discrepancy was unmistakable, showing a clear pattern of encroachment along the eastern edge of the development, precisely where the most expensive properties, including Elaine's, had been built. The truth is right here, verified by county records and historical surveys. The original developer cut corners. The proper adjustments were never filed, and then 3 years ago someone, and I think we all know who, tried to cover it up by filing fraudulent amendments with my forged signature. I passed the enlarged photos to Barbara Winters, who began sharing them with other residents. The evidence was compelling, not just technical survey details that only a professional would understand, but visual proof that anyone could comprehend. The satellite imagery told a story that no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure. Bruce stepped forward, adding his official weight to my claims. As Deputy County Clerk, I can verify that these historical records are authentic and properly maintained in our archives. The amendments filed 3 years ago contain signatures that do not match our verified records of Mr. Renner's official signature, which we have documented on hundreds of county filings over his 30-year career. James Prescott's face had turned ashen as he realized the implications. His carefully tailored suit and polished appearance contrasted sharply with his expression of dawning horror. "Elaine, is this true? Are you saying our own house is—" "He's lying," Elaine snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. Her perfect composure was cracking. A strand of hair had fallen across her face, her cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is just a desperate attempt to—" "It's all right here, Miss Prescott," Caroline Bennett interjected, holding up the evidence. The county attorney's professional demeanor added gravity to the moment as she methodically laid out the legal implications. "County records don't lie, even when people try to falsify them. As county attorney, I'm particularly concerned about these forged documents bearing Jeremy's signature. That constitutes fraud and tampering with government records. Class D felonies in this state, each carrying potential sentences of up to 5 years. The mention of prison terms sent another shockwave through the crowd. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about criminal activity at the highest levels of their community leadership. Mark Ruffalo, leaning heavily on his cane, made his way to the front of the gathering. "I lost my garden, the roses I'd cultivated for 40 years, because this woman told me I was violating codes that didn't exist." His voice trembled with emotion. "She showed me papers, much like the ones she's been waving today. I believed her because she was the HOA president. I trusted her authority." Several other residents nodded in recognition, some murmuring their own experiences of intimidation and harassment. The collective picture emerging was damning. A systematic pattern of abuse that had affected dozens of homeowners over the years. Elaine's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. In a last desperate move, she lunged for the documents in Caroline's hands, her manicured nails clawing at the papers. Sheriff Jackson intercepted her, grasping her wrist firmly but professionally. "That's enough, Ms. Prescott. Don't make this worse for yourself." "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. The polished executive was gone, replaced by a woman on the verge of panic. "After the Highlands collapsed, I lost everything. My company, my reputation, millions of dollars, some of it from people you don't want to disappoint." She glanced nervously at her husband, who had backed away, creating physical distance between them. "This development was my chance to make it right, to rebuild. When I discovered the surveying error, I saw an opportunity to commit fraud?" Sheriff Jackson asked, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "To forge documents? To harass and intimidate homeowners? To use heavy machinery to destroy someone's property? Those aren't opportunities, Miss Prescott. Those are crimes." The bulldozer operators and security guards, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began backing away from Elaine. The security guards slipped off their Oakshire Estates jackets, suddenly reluctant to be identified with the organization. Arnold Davenport approached me directly, his weathered face showing genuine remorse. "Mr. Renner, I had no idea what was really going on here. She told us this was a routine HOA enforcement action with all the proper authorizations. I've been in construction for 40 years and never been part of anything like this." "I believe you, Arnold," I said, extending my hand, which he shook gratefully. "She's manipulated a lot of people. You were just trying to keep your business afloat." The younger bulldozer operators seemed especially relieved, one of them actually sitting down on the ground, head in hands, processing how close he'd come to participating in something illegal. These weren't bad people, just working folks caught in Elaine's web of manipulation. Barbara Winters stepped forward, addressing the other Oakshire residents. Her normally quiet demeanor was transformed by a new sense of purpose. I am moving for an emergency HOA board meeting tonight, 7 o'clock at the clubhouse, to address these revelations and vote on Elaine's continued presidency. The chorus of agreement was unanimous, with several residents shouting, "Second," and "I." Almost immediately, residents began organizing via text messages, arranging for childcare and carpools to ensure maximum attendance. As the immediate crisis diffused, the practical questions began. Residents were understandably concerned about the status of their homes. A middle-aged man in a business suit raised his hand nervously. "What happens to our properties?" he called out, voicing what everyone was thinking. "If they're technically on your land, are you going to make us move?" The fear in his voice was evident. These weren't wealthy developers or corrupt officials. They were families with mortgages, children in local schools, lives built around homes they'd purchased in good faith. This was the critical moment. How I responded would determine whether this situation devolved into years of bitter litigation or became an opportunity for healing. I shook my head decisively. "That's not my intention at all. The individual homeowners aren't at fault here." I made eye contact with as many residents as I could, wanting them to see my sincerity. "What I propose is this. We work together to properly document the actual property lines. Homeowners will acknowledge the historical error and pay a modest one-time fee, perhaps $1,000 per affected property, to officially transfer the land titles and legitimize your properties. It's the right thing to do, and it protects everyone's interests going forward." The relief among the residents was palpable. Audible sighs and relaxed postures replaced the tension of moments before. Barbara Winters was already taking notes, organizing the practical details of how such an arrangement might work. What could have become an ugly, divisive battle instead was turning into an opportunity for community healing. Sheriff Jackson approached Elaine, who had collapsed onto a decorative boulder by the roadside, her head in her hands. Her perfect manicure couldn't hide the trembling of her fingers as she realized the full impact of what was happening. "Miss Prescott, I need you to come with me to answer some questions about these altered records and the property damage to Mr. Renner's driveway." As the bulldozers were being driven away, Arnold taking personal responsibility for ensuring they left no further damage, and Elaine getting a personal escort from Sheriff Jackson to discuss the property damage charges and the forged documents, Bruce pulled me aside. His expression was grave, his voice lowered. "You know," he whispered, "there's actually one more thing about the county records that you might find interesting." He handed me a folder with information that made my jaw drop. This wasn't just about my driveway or Oakshire estates anymore. The folder contained evidence of similar schemes Elaine had run throughout the county, targeting vulnerable homeowners with falsified surveys and violations. There were at least 30 documented cases spanning 5 years. Elderly homeowners, non-English speakers, people who lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. The pattern was clear, methodical, and extended far beyond my property. This was about justice for an entire community that had been manipulated by someone who thought her connections and knowledge of real estate law made her untouchable. As I watched Elaine being escorted to the sheriff's car, I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that her schemes had been exposed before more people lost their homes and life savings. Her shoulders were slumped, her carefully constructed image of power and authority shattered. James Prescott stood apart, already on his phone with what sounded like his attorney, distancing himself from his wife's actions. The real work of rebuilding community trust was just beginning. But as I looked around at the impromptu gathering of neighbors, some from Oakshire estates, some from the surrounding farms, all talking earnestly about moving forward, I felt the first stirrings of genuine optimism. The 6 months following what locals now called the Bulldozer Showdown brought remarkable changes to our community. The emergency HOA meeting that night had been predictably heated, with residents demanding answers and accountability. By the meeting's end, Elaine had been unanimously removed as president, with Barbara Winters stepping in as interim leader, with a mandate for transparency and reform. The folder Bruce had given me contained damning evidence of a pattern of intimidation and fraud stretching back 5 years. Working with Caroline Bennett, we established a restoration fund for previous victims of Elaine's schemes, funded largely by the recovery of misappropriated HOA funds and properties that had been improperly acquired. Mark Ruffalo was one of the first to benefit, receiving compensation that allowed him to purchase a new garden property where he could restart his beloved rose collection. The legal consequences for Elaine and James Prescott were substantial. The forged documents alone resulted in felony charges, while the attempted property destruction and fraud led to additional counts. Their assets were frozen pending investigation of financial improprieties at both the HOA and Westridge Partners. The powerful investor who had backed their planned development on my farm, a stern-faced man named Victor Harmon, turned state's evidence against them when he realized the extent of their deception. But the most profound changes were in the community itself. With the truth about the property lines established, we worked out a fair solution for all affected homeowners. Rather than demanding exorbitant payments or forcing anyone to move, I offered a simple acknowledgement agreement and a modest fee to officially transfer the affected portions of land to the current residents. For most, it amounted to less than $1,000, a small price for permanent peace of mind and clear title. The process revealed something unexpected. Once freed from Elaine's iron-fisted control, the residents of Oakshire Estates were overwhelmingly reasonable, fair-minded people who valued community harmony. Many expressed shame over how the HOA had been weaponized against neighbors and outsiders alike. Barbara led a comprehensive overhaul of the HOA bylaws, significantly limiting the board's power to issue fines or take enforcement action without due process and homeowner input. Lucy Powell's journalistic background proved invaluable as she helped document the transformation. Her series of articles for the local paper, When Neighbors Become Community, chronicled the journey from conflict to cooperation. Lucy and I had grown closer through the ordeal, our friendship deepening into something that sometimes felt like it might become more. My farm, once the focus of a power struggle, became something of a community gathering place. When spring arrived, I converted 2 acres near the boundary with Oakshire Estates into a community garden where residents from both the development and surrounding rural properties could grow vegetables and flowers together. Mark Ruffalo supervised the rose section, teaching newcomers the art of cultivation he'd perfected over decades. The most significant development came through an unexpected channel. Meliora Lawson, the retired judge who had helped with my case, nominated me to chair a new county land use ethics committee. Working with Bruce and others, we drafted a comprehensive reform package that the county commissioners adopted unanimously. The RENA regulations, as they came to be known, established new transparency requirements for development approvals, stronger protections for property owners facing pressure from developers or HOAs, and criminal penalties for survey fraud. On a perfect autumn Saturday, exactly 6 months after the bulldozer confrontation, I hosted a community barbecue that drew over 100 people from Oakshire Estates and the surrounding farms. My driveway, fully restored and now featuring beautiful landscaping on both sides, planted by former HOA board members as a gesture of goodwill, welcomed a steady stream of visitors throughout the day. Barbara Winters found me by the grill, where I was flipping burgers with Lucy's help. "I never properly apologized for my role in all this," she said quietly. "I knew some of what Elaine was doing wasn't right, but I was too afraid to speak up. My silence enabled her." "You're making up for it now," I assured her. "The new HOA is a model for the region. Caroline tells me 3 other developments have already adopted your reform bylaws." Barbara smiled, looking out over the mixed crowd of suburbanites and farmers mingling easily on my lawn. "It's strange. Elaine always claimed she was increasing property values and protecting the community, but our home values have actually gone up 5% since all this happened. People want to live in a place known for fairness and good neighbors." As the afternoon wound down, I found myself standing with Lucy, Bruce, and Mark at the edge of the new community garden. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rows of late-season vegetables and Mark's carefully tended roses. "I've been thinking," I said to them, "about establishing a scholarship fund for students interested in land surveying and property law. With what's left of my grandfather's trust, we could help train a new generation that understands both the technical aspects and the ethical responsibilities of determining where one person's rights end and Bruce nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what this country needs. Education is always better than litigation." Mark Ruffalo, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You know what I learned from all this? It's never too late for justice, but it takes people willing to stand up not just for themselves, but for their neighbors too." He gestured toward the community gathered on my lawn. "Look at what you've built here, not just boundaries and fences but bridges." As twilight settled over the farm, I watched the children of Oakshire Estates playing tag around my old oak tree, while their parents chatted on blankets spread across the lawn. Sometimes in life, the people who think they hold all the power are standing on shakier ground than they realize. Knowledge, patience, and community are always stronger than intimidation and greed. And remember, it's never a bad idea to know exactly where your property lines are and to stand firm when someone tries to cross them. The real strength of any community isn't found in fancy clubhouses or uniform mailboxes, but in neighbors who look out for each other, who recognize that our shared humanity matters more than property values or power struggles. As I watched Lucy approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade, a warm smile on her face, I knew that in losing my driveway for a day, I'd gained something far more valuable, a true home, surrounded by people who understood the difference between a house and a community. The small farm that was supposed to be my quiet retirement had become something much more, a catalyst for change, a gathering place for neighbors, and the foundation for a different kind of development than Elaine had envisioned. Not condos and shopping centers, but the growth of justice, community, and trust. Some boundaries, it turns out, are meant to be crossed after all.